So when we were putting this workshop together on the topic of the future of workplaces and smart buildings, we thought it would be a nice idea to put together a bit of a position paper and talk a little bit about what we've been seeing in terms of current trends, but what we would like to see in the future and going forward with relation to smart buildings and also work. And so a big thanks to Jonathan for opening up this, because I think a lot of what you were saying really resonates with me personally, but also I think with what we were seeing and what trends we see with smart buildings. So thanks for the intro. So where are we now? So of course, there was the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we're sort of in a recovery phase, although of course COVID is still here. But what that means is from an office perspective, we've really shifted towards this hybrid way of working. And you hear people talking about it all the time. At my work, there's all kinds of talk about hybrid working. I go to my office 2 days a week, for example, and it's great. So we have a combination of these physical offices and also virtual or home offices where we're working. And there's trade-offs and there's benefits to both of them. And so what we see is that when you go into your physical office, one of the reasons why I go into my office, well, first, if I need to use the lab, because I'm a scientist, obviously I don't have a lab at home. But I go in to see my colleagues and to have those spontaneous chats over a cup of coffee, or to have lunch together, or to go for a walk together, and to interact and to talk about ideas and new projects and new proposals and what we're working on. And those sorts of creative things, maybe more personal conversations, those are what tend to happen in the office. And so those spaces should really be facilitating that. Whereas at home, depending on how you work, if I need to write something or if I need to concentrate on a spreadsheet, I work much better at home where I don't have any distractions. So it's really kind of we're seeing this trend towards this hybrid way of working and finding the benefits of both your home office and your virtual office. And so tied to this, for these physical offices, we're seeing also in physical buildings, advancement and growth of smart buildings at the same time. And this, of course, is part of what the smart building certification is doing, is to help assess the smartness of buildings. So two of the big questions that I have are, how do we quantify smartness and quantify the impacts of a smart building or a smart technology? And when I say impacts, I mean the economic impacts, the environmental impacts, the social impacts. This is kind of what you were talking about as well, Jonathan. And so a quick scan of the literature, it's really hard to answer that question. And the other question that we had, which was more the focus of our paper, is how can smart buildings and smart technologies really contribute to the future of work and physical workplaces in this hybrid model that we're seeing? So one of the first things that we wanted to do was define what's a smart building. And this is something that we couldn't really find a consistent definition for in the literature. Everyone sort of had different ideas for it. So I think one of the nicest things to come out of this workshop and this paper that we did is a solid definition of what's a smart building and what does that mean? And of course, it gets a little bit complicated, but basically there's some keywords here in this definition. So constantly evolving, it's a growing field. So things are always changing. But it's really about using your data and your infrastructure to improve your performance of your building. So it's really about applying that data to control your building. It's really about the data and how you use it. And of course, it ties into improvements with respect to those impacts I was talking about: economic, environmental, and social. So based on 15 buildings that the Smart Building Certification certified in the last couple of years across Europe and the UK, we pulled out sort of 5 trends at a high level, but this is just something that we wanted to sort of share in terms of what are some of the trends that we're seeing now and into the future. So there were 5 key trends that stood out. And the first one, and first and foremost, is that A smart building is really about data-driven decision-making. So it's not having a bunch of technologies, it's not having a bunch of data. It's about using that data and making decisions with it to improve your building performance. That's the key. That's like the main pillar that's common to a smart building. If you don't have that, you're not a smart building, no matter how many bells and whistles and technologies you have in your building. So that's the key. The second trend is flexibility. So Jonathan, you were always also talking about this a little bit, I think, how we use the space, looking at occupancy, not just for people in the office or the employees, but maybe also for the community, for example. So this really comes down to, again, that capacity and increasing that. And it's also related to the long-term operation of buildings. So there's value in having a space and smart infrastructure that's flexible. So one of the things, for example, is you're building your smart systems in grids, where if a new tenant comes along in 5 years, you don't need to tear everything out and reinstall it. Maybe you just need to move a few walls, for example. So things like that really also add to the durability and the longevity of the building. And of course, there are economic benefits associated with that. And so, you know, in terms of how smart systems can help with this, of course, there's things like occupancy sensors telling us how to use the space, what spaces are being used, what types of spaces are being used, when, things like that. The third trend is really about user experience. So again, this also has value from an economic perspective, because as we already heard, if you have happy occupants, they're more productive in a healthier environment. So well-being is really important. And that ties in with your return on investment in terms of productivity, attracting talent, holding talent, all those types of things. And this is difficult to measure, let's say, and to quantify. And there's a lot of, I don't know, it's difficult because we know how we feel when we're in a space that's like this, and it's a really nice place to be. But to actually measure that and what the effect of our workspace is on us psychologically, that's a really difficult thing to measure, as I think Sophie, you know. But that would be very interesting, I think, as well. So I do expect to see more focus on user experience going forward. Those social benefits, I think, are really interesting. There's also more of an emphasis on safety and security. And that, of course, relates to health. So not just well-being, but also after the pandemic, people are concerned about health and distancing and all this kind of stuff. And so, you know, our smart technologies can help. It's related to occupancy as well, but also, you know, thermal cameras or checking temperatures or giving alerts, you know, about carbon dioxide and things like that. We'll see more and more of that. In terms of security, it's also related to security of companies and security of the building in terms of resilience, and how that impacts a company as well. And also, I think, well, I'm a sustainability researcher, so maybe I'm biased, but I think sustainability is still really a driver for all buildings. But we see that the smartest buildings are also the most sustainable. They go hand in hand. And energy management is really the priority, because that has the biggest impact, besides people, on costs. But of course, there's also trends related to sustainability in terms of durability, or that flexibility, longevity, other types of efficiencies as well, like usage of the space, for example. And I do think sustainability also really ties in with the social impacts and the economic impacts. It's really kind of, I think, what ties everything together in a smart building. So I think this is my last slide, but so the paper just kind of gives an overview of some of the trends we're seeing and what we expect more of in the future. But I do think what came out of this for me is that there's a really big opportunity here. And I would challenge all of you to think about how we can better quantify smartness and those impacts. So environmental impacts, social impacts, economic impacts. It's really hard to do, and that's why not many people are doing it. But with the growth of smart buildings and with more collaboration and with researchers on board and all these smart solutions, we really do have an opportunity to actually measure, quantify, and qualify some of this. And this is really kind of the power of a collective group of people who are interested in this topic. So that would be my challenge to everybody involved in this workshop, is to really work together to come up with some research questions and measure them and answer those questions. I think that's really needed. And the more that we can show the benefits of smart buildings, smart technologies with research, credible, peer-reviewed scientific research, the more people will come along and we'll see more growth in this area.